So as an extension of the previous question, we continue with the reading from 1 Corinthians 15, where we're told that Adam became a soul, but Jesus became a life-giving spirit. Adam became a living soul, Jesus became a life-giving spirit. And so we're asking the question, have you thought about what is the difference between a soul and a spirit? Have you had this discussion? If you're at a Bible college, if you're at a seminary somewhere, you've probably had this discussion numerous times and considered the options and not really arrived at a conclusion, although some people have a strong conclusion about this. The options that are generally brought to you are that some would say no, soul and spirit are pretty much the same thing, so we are what's called bipartite. We have physical and we have spiritual, and others would say no, it's clearly a distinction, so we're tripartite. We have physical, we have soul, and we have spirit. The scriptures do seem to fall on the side of tripartite, that soul and spirit are actually something different. The passage that we've read tells us that Adam's life was different to that which Jesus had, as in soul and versus spirit. We could have a look at Hebrews chapter 4, where we're told that the word of God is so exact, so sharp, that it can separate even the soul from the spirit. It can separate one invisible from another invisible. And so, which then tells us the two are very close for them to use it, for the scriptures to use it in this way. So we're just asking you to consider the question about soul and spirit. What is the difference? In big picture terms, we generally talk about the soul as my natural capacities. So I do have self-awareness as opposed to animals. I do have that self-awareness and that conscience and my thought process, my intellect, my emotions. Those things go to shape who I am. It's not just the fact that I was born physically as a lump of flesh. So I have a soul. But then spirit is my capacity to connect with God. It is my connection with God. It is otherworldly. So this is sort of like the sort of answer that you'll get, and yet it's not entirely satisfying, and there are some reasons for that. So let me take you a little deeper in the discussion. If you went back to Genesis chapter 2, where God breathed life into Adam, ask yourself the question, did he breathe soul into Adam, or did he breathe spirit into Adam? Now I'm inclined to read that he breathed soul into Adam. He was a pile of dust until God, he may have had his flesh and his bones even from the dust, but until God breathed into his nostrils, he did not have life. And so I'm inclined to think that is his natural invisible attributes of his natural being. However, clearly Adam had spiritual life as well, because he suffered spiritual death. So then you've got to say, well, there's no record of God coming back at a later time and also giving him spiritual life. So maybe it was spiritual life that came to him. One way to think about this is that perhaps spiritual is actually part of soul. Spiritual is one of the sources of your awareness, one of the sources of your motivational capacity, and soul is the whole group, which includes your non-spiritual ones. It's a very complex question, because then you've got to ask, okay, so where does inbred sin reside? Does it reside in soul, or does it reside in spirit? Well, I think it resides in soul, is my opinion, because we're told that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, which seems to talk about a difference between spirit and soul. So I don't think inbred sin. I think inbred sin, in the terminology that I use later in this book, or we're already introducing to you, inbred sin is actually the cavity that's left when you take the spiritual out of the soul. Another way for you to ask the question is, where does conscience reside? So some people would say to you, spirit is the image of God part of your being. But that doesn't quite work for me either, because I ask the question, where does your conscience reside? Because conscience is a reflection of the image of God. And we're told that in Romans, we're given that indication. And so I don't think that conscience belongs to spiritual, because while we're spiritually dead, we still have conscience. So I also conclude that conscience belongs in soul. And so there's a whole array of questions. I'd love you to send me an email and tell me, yes, but what about this question? Because I'm not sure that we're going to understand it entirely in this world, but I don't think there's anything that God deliberately hides from us. So perhaps one of you clever students will come up with the answer and be able to fill the rest of us in on just what's going on. What is the difference between soul and spirit? Because it really does have a big impact upon your salvation and your future and your eternity and how you relate to God. It is a meaningful discussion because it helps you understand the process of degeneration, of the corruption of sin, and of regeneration of the Spirit coming into your life. Happy studies, and I hope that you have an answer, and we can sit around under a tree in heaven and discuss the answers someday.